May 23rd, 1944, Carano, Italy. 4:30 in the morning. The ground is still dark. Somewhere ahead, buried in the soil, are German mines. Beyond the minefield, 3 machine gun nests. Beyond those, a fortified German defensive line that has pinned the entire Allied advance for weeks. A 25-year-old sergeant from a cotton farm in Mississippi stands at the edge of that minefield. Nobody ordered him to go in alone. Nobody told him to leave his squad behind. He asked for permission to lead the assault himself, because he had spent the previous days crawling the terrain at night, memorizing where the mines were, learning the depressions and ditches he could follow without getting blown apart. Permission granted. He steps into the minefield alone. What happens over the next 16 hours will destroy 3 German tanks, capture 17 enemy soldiers, kill 8 more, and end with Van T. Barfoot carrying 2 wounded men nearly a mile through active enemy fire on a pair of legs that had no business still working. 1 man, 1 day, the Medal of Honor. But to understand why a cotton farm boy from Edinburgh, Mississippi walked alone into a minefield at dawn, you have to understand where he came from and what had already forged him long before the Army ever got the chance. Van Thurman Barfoot was born on June 15, 1919, in Edinburgh, Mississippi. His grandmother was Choctaw. His father worked 35 acres of cotton, land that demanded everything from everyone old enough to hold a tool. He started working the fields as soon as he could walk between the rows. Cotton doesn't care how old you are. Neither did the Depression. School ended after 8th grade. There wasn't time for more, and there wasn't money. What there was work and hunting. Duck, squirrel, whatever the land offered. He learned to shoot the way Audie Murphy learned to shoot. Not as sport, but as the difference between eating and not eating. When the Great Depression hit Mississippi, it hit hard. Barfoot joined Roosevelt's Civilian Conservation Corps, one of the federal programs designed to put young men to work building trails, planting trees, doing whatever the government needed doing in exchange for food and a small wage. He traveled to Lexington. He traveled to Salem, Oregon. He saw the country for the first time. He enlisted in the United States Army in 1940. Not because anyone told him to. Not because of Pearl Harbor. That was still more than a year away. He enlisted because it was a job, and because something in him was drawn to it, in the way men who have spent their whole lives working with their hands are sometimes drawn to a structure that rewards exactly that. He was a natural soldier in the way that some men simply are. Disciplined, patient, observant. The skills that kept a family fed on a cotton farm in Mississippi. Reading terrain, moving quietly, staying calm when everything is moving fast, turned out to be exactly the skills that kept men alive in combat. He went through the early campaigns. Sicily, 1943. Brutal house-to-house fighting as the Allies pushed north through Italy. Salerno, where German counterattacks nearly drove the Allied landing back into the sea. Anzio, the grinding, months-long siege where men lived in holes in the ground and died by inches. By the time Barfoot's unit, the 157th Infantry Regiment of the 45th Infantry Division, reached the area around Carano in May 1944, he was a seasoned combat sergeant with years of fighting behind him. He had seen what worked and what didn't. He had watched men die from bad decisions and bad terrain and bad luck. So when his company was ordered to attack the German defensive positions at Carano on May 23rd, Barfoot didn't just study the maps. He went out at night, personally, carefully, and walked the ground. He found the minefield's patterns. He identified the drainage ditches and low ground that a careful man could follow without triggering a detonator. He located the German machine gun positions by sound and by the faint glow of their equipment. By the time dawn came on May 23rd, Van Barfoot knew that ground better than most of the Germans defending it. He asked permission to lead the assault himself. They said yes. He stepped into the minefield alone. The first machine gun nest was on the German flank, positioned to pour fire into any infantry advance from the side, turning what should have been a forward assault into a slaughter. Barfoot moved through the minefield, following the route he had memorized. Low ground, ditches, the places where the soil had been disturbed and then smoothed. He came up on the nest from a direction the Germans weren't watching. He pulled the pin on a hand grenade and threw it in. 2 Germans killed, 3 wounded. The gun went silent. He didn't stop. He kept moving along the German defensive line toward the second machine gun position. By now, the German command knew something was happening on their flank. They just didn't know what, or how many, or where it was coming from. It was one man with a Tommy gun. He came up on the second nest and opened fire. 2 more Germans killed, 3 captured. He zip-tied them, in the field, alone, and kept moving. The crew of a third machine gun position saw what was coming. They made a decision. They put their hands up. Barfoot now had 17 German prisoners, by himself, in the middle of enemy-held ground. He had to get them back to his own lines while keeping his weapon up and his prisoners moving. He did it, but the day wasn't close to finished. That afternoon, the Germans launched their counterattack. 3 Mark VI tanks, the heaviest German armor on the battlefield, rolled out of the German lines directly toward Barfoot's platoon positions. Mark VI Tigers, the tanks that had terrorized Allied infantry across every theater of the war. 60 tons of steel, an 88mm main gun, and armor so thick that standard anti-tank rifles barely scratched it. A bazooka could hurt one, if you were close enough, if your angle was right, if your hands were steady, and if you were willing to stand in the open at point-blank range while a 60-ton machine tried to run you down. Barfoot picked up a bazooka. He moved to an exposed position, no cover, no foxhole, no concealment, directly in front of the 3 advancing tanks. He let them come. The closer they got, the better his angle on the track housing. 75 yards. He fired. The rocket hit the lead tank's track assembly and blew it apart. The tank lurched sideways and stopped, immobilized. The crew opened their hatches and climbed out. Barfoot dropped the bazooka, picked up his Tommy gun, and killed 3 of them before they reached the ground. The other 2 tanks looked at what had just happened to their lead vehicle. They changed direction and retreated. 2 Mark VI Tigers, tanks that had driven Allied infantry off a dozen fields, turned around because of one man with a bazooka and a Tommy gun. Barfoot wasn't finished. He moved forward into the area the Germans had just vacated and found an abandoned German artillery piece, a heavy gun that would have been used to support the next counterattack. He destroyed it. Then he walked back to his own lines. Then he picked up 2 wounded soldiers and carried them. Both of them, not together, one at a time, back and forth across 1,700 yards of ground that was still under fire. A mile, through active combat, with legs that had been moving at combat pace since 4:30 in the morning. He got them both back. The official count from May 23, 1944. 8 Germans killed, 17 captured, 3 Mark VI tanks neutralized, 1 artillery piece destroyed, 2 wounded soldiers recovered. All by one man, between dawn and dusk. The Army nominated Van T. Barfoot for the Medal of Honor. When the ceremony came, Barfoot made one request. He didn't want it in a grand hall. He didn't want generals and photographers and formal settings. He wanted it in the field, an open area near Epinal, France, so that the soldiers he had fought beside could attend. They held it in a field. Then they put him on a train to Washington, D.C. What happened on that train is not in most history books. It didn't make most of the official accounts. But it might be the most revealing thing Barfoot ever did. He was a Medal of Honor winner being transported to the capital for a formal reception. A sergeant from Mississippi, the most decorated living soldier at that moment. When he went to the dining car, he was told there would be a wait for a seat. He looked around and noticed a black army captain sitting alone at a table. The waiter explained, carefully, that he assumed Barfoot wouldn't want to sit with him. Barfoot looked at the waiter. He said, "Why not? I've fought with colored men. Why shouldn't I eat with them?" He sat down. This was 1944, in America. A white sergeant from Mississippi, decorated with the nation's highest military honor, sitting down to eat with a black officer in a segregated dining car because he had decided, somewhere in the fields of Italy, that a man who fights beside you is a man worth sitting next to. The story got out. Newspapers picked it up. And then Mississippi Senator Theodore Bilbo, a man who had been a member of the Ku Klux Klan, who had spent his career in the Senate defending segregation, made the mistake of asking Barfoot directly about his views on serving alongside black soldiers. Barfoot answered him in public, for the record. He said, "I found out after I did some fighting in this war that the colored boys fight just as good as the white boys. I've changed my idea a lot about colored people since I got into this war. And so have a lot of other boys from the South." A KKK senator from Mississippi had just been publicly corrected by a Medal of Honor winner from Mississippi. On the record, in a newspaper. Civil rights organizations quoted Barfoot's words for years afterward. Not because he was an activist. He wasn't. Not because he had made a speech. He hadn't. Because he had simply told the truth about what he had seen, in the plain language of a man who grew up working cotton fields and had spent 4 years watching men of every background hold a line and die beside him. He kept serving. Korea came. He went. Vietnam came. He went. 34 years of military service total, retiring as a colonel in 1974. He went home to Virginia and lived quietly. In 2009, Van T. Barfoot was 90 years old. He lived in a subdivision in Henrico County, Virginia. In his front yard, he had erected a 21-foot flagpole flying the American flag. His homeowners association sent him a letter. The flagpole violated community rules about yard structures. He would have to take it down. He refused. The story went national overnight. A 90-year-old Medal of Honor winner, a man who had walked alone into a minefield, destroyed 3 German tanks, and carried 2 wounded soldiers through enemy fire in a single day, was being told by a homeowners association to take down his American flag. The HOA backed down. The Virginia state legislature passed a law protecting veterans' right to fly the flag on their own property. Barfoot kept his flagpole. He died on March 2nd, 2012, 92 years old, from a fall outside his own home. Not in a hospital, not dramatically. Just an old man on an ordinary morning, at the end of a life that had been anything but. In 2023, Fort Pickett in Virginia, where soldiers have trained for generations, was renamed Fort Barfoot. Think about who Van Barfoot actually was. A Choctaw cotton farm boy who left school after 8th grade. A man who enlisted before Pearl Harbor because the Army was a job and a structure that suited the way he was built. A soldier who spent his nights before a major assault crawling through enemy ground in the dark, memorizing minefield patterns, because preparation was what men from cotton farms did when the stakes were high. On May 23, 1944, he walked alone into a minefield at dawn and spent the next 16 hours doing things that the official citation describes in careful military language. and that the men who watched it described with the kind of silence that falls over people when they've seen something they know they'll never fully explain. 3 tanks, 17 prisoners, 8 kills. 2 men carried a mile through fire. And then, on a train to Washington, he sat down next to a black army captain because, why wouldn't he? He'd fought beside men like that, and a man who fights beside you is a man worth sitting next to. That sentence, delivered to a KKK senator in plain Mississippi English, did more for the conversation about race in the American military than 100 official reports. He never called himself a hero. When asked years later what drove him that day at Carano, he said, "I was doing my job." A leader is supposed to protect, lead, and sacrifice himself if necessary. That's it. No drama, no mythology. Just a cotton farm boy who learned early that the work in front of you is the work you do, and you do it until it's finished. Van T. Barfoot. Fort Barfoot. He earned it before breakfast.